Okay. Today, my guest is Professor Sergio Lazzarini. I'll keep my introduction short to maximize our time with him. In the next 30 minutes or so, we'll talk about Sergio as a person, Professor Lazzarini as a thought leader and an esteemed scholar, and finally as a mentor to many PhD students and junior faculty. For the sake of time, I'll skip many of his accomplishments and give you a very quick snapshot. Professor Lazzarini is a research fellow at the National Council for Scientific and Technological Development in Brazil. His research received several awards, such as the Glueck Best Paper Award at AOM 2003, Best Paper Prize of the Ibero-American AOM Conference 2003 and the Brazilian Academy of Management in 2005, Best Presentation Prize at SMS Rio 2011, Best Paper Prize, Distinguished Best Paper Prize at AOM STR in 2020, and the Jabuti Prize for the book Capitalism of Ties. Sergio is an associate editor at Global Strategy Journal. He sits or sat on the editorial review boards of Journal of Management, Strategic Organization, Academic Management Perspectives, and SMJ. He was a member of the Executive Committee, a global representative of the Strategic Management Division of the AOM, and a board member of the International Society for the New Institutional Economics. Thank you, Sergio, for joining us.
Thank you, guys. It's a real pleasure to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
Thank you. Sergio, what did you want to become when you were a child?
Actually, I used to draw relatively, well, I'll say, for my age. So I actually wanted to become like, Stan Lee, the Marvel kind of creator. So I had some superheroes, and so essentially I wanted to, that was actually my dream, to be like, a creator like Marvel. But at some point in my life, actually, I didn't want to draw anymore. It was kind of I kind of lost interest in that until actually my daughter was born. I was drawing a lot for her, and then now she's in the arts, she studied arts, and she told me it was because of that. So anyway, my legacy, a small legacy along those lines is continuing with my daughter, I would say.
That's super interesting. So where did you grow up?
I grew up in São Paulo, Brazil.
Perfect.
Yeah.
And can you, living in Brazil, did you distinguish the difference between foreign versus domestic?
Oh yeah, when I grew up in the 70s, so Brazil back then was a closed economy, and we had a dictatorship, etc., etc. So, and very nationalist. So, so I remember when we had the first McDonald's, and my initial reaction was like, I don't like this. This is so different from what my grandmother cooks, etc., etc. So my reaction was really against it. I was kind of I remember that I didn't like it actually, and I would say that I would prefer local dishes, etc. But over time, we get used to it, and then we had a period where the economy was more open, etc. But that I would say that was the first moment where I saw the effects of globalization.
And how did you choose academia?
Yeah, so my mother was a teacher in public schools. I used to be with her several times in the classroom, and that was also something that caught my attention. My mother was a very good teacher, and I was like, yeah, I think I like this. Perhaps let's see. So I always had this idea that I would become an instructor. Not necessarily a researcher, but what happened is that during my when I studied at the University of São Paulo, I met a professor, Evaristo Neves, and he actually strongly encouraged me to pursue research. He actually said, "Oh, let's do this together." And he actually, I was intending to be a consulting or something, and he strongly pushed me to apply for a master's program, etc., etc. And then I went to a master's. Then I was accepted by a master's program in business at the University of São Paulo, where there was a group of researchers such as Décio Zilberstein, and they were studying transaction cost economics. Back then, it was talking about 93 or so, 94 actually, 1994. And Williamson, Décio spent some time with Williamson at Berkeley, and then when I started reading that, I was enamored. I was fell in love with that essentially. So then I decided to be an academic because I thought that all those discussions made a lot of sense.
Interesting. And how do you choose, or where is this interest coming from for international business, international strategy?
Yeah, essentially my original training was in strategy. So I did my PhD at the Washington University in St. Louis, where my original intention was to, my dissertation was about interorganizational relationships, buyer-supplier relationships, etc. But being an emerging market person and also interacting with that interdisciplinary group at WashU. So Douglas North was there. I took two courses taught by Douglas North. Actually, I had the pleasure to be Douglas North's student twice. I mean, it's all about institutions and countries. I remember several discussions about development, etc. And when we decided to move back to Brazil after I graduated, I realized that there were so many important problems, local problems are not covered or not examined by the existing literature in strategy, etc. And potentially those problems could generate new lines of research. For instance, I noticed that in Brazil there was a strong presence of the government and economy, and because of that, I mean, decided to pursue this line of research that is known. I mean, now in international business, there's this field examining state capitalism or state-owned firms, all those things. So that started decades ago when I realized my engagement in this kind of research started when I realized that my local environment was much different from what was discussed back then. Discussions in strategy focused on private firms, private entrepreneurs, etc., etc. And of course, this caught the attention of international business, but also I have published those topics in strategy in general. It's great that international business is now considered an important topic.
Yeah. The only person I haven't met is Douglas North. How was he in class?
He was very. I took two courses basically. One, it was a large kind of section, several students. It was in the law school actually. It was more like a lecture, and we read his books, etc., etc. So the second one was more like a discussion. It was a PhD course on new institutional economics, and then we had discussions and he would be very, he would provoke discussions. He would not admit, simple answers, right? For instance, he would say, Douglas North would say, yeah, there's in economics we're trying to discuss the role of social norms. However, Gary Becker from Chicago said that social norms don't matter. What matters is, economic incentives. What do you think? So we had to react along those lines, right? Very high level discussions. It was excellent. I'm really honored to be interacted with him shortly, right, in those occasions.
Super interesting. One of the conferences in American Economic Association conferences. I used to go to those ones early on right. When I was doing my PhD. Oliver Williamson, George Baker, Bob Givens, they were in the same session, and Bob Givens was the junior faculty. in that lineup.
That's
It
great.
was, I mean, you learn a lot. You learn a lot from very sudden burst of these interactions that they challenge each other. It's so
and
valuable.
I'm honored because at WashU, a lot of those guys circulated, and including Ronald Coase. And I took Ronald Coase to his hotel one day, and he was talking about his stories about, you know, Monaco, when he met Grace Kelly, and I mean, it's kind of, I don't believe I'm here. And so Coase in particular was very influential to me. I mean, of course, Coase, Williamson, North, all those guys were related, and eventually they led to this institutional revolution, new institutional economics kind of a revolution that strongly permeated, right, strategy and international business. So,
Sergio, if you stopped doing what you're doing today, what's the second best career path for you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm an academic. I love what I love in academia is this freedom to do research and also interacting with students. So this is great. But also, I also like a lot interacting with practice, right? So organizations, etc. And in several occasions in Brazil, I interacted with legislators. So, you know, congressmen, where I would, you know, they would ask, what do you think about this, I don't know, this development bank and something. So I love that kind of interaction because, I mean, it's hugely important. Those guys are proposing laws, right, or bills that will eventually be approved, etc. And that can have a big impact. So if in another kind of a path, I thought about that several times. I mean, you know, somehow interact with those policymakers to bring evidence, you know, to bring discussions about. I mean, I don't think that it's our goal as an academic, as academics to actually defend certain types of policies because that depends on our own preferences, right? I mean, anyway, I mean, we are all biased, right? So what we can do is to show that, you know, this is working, this is not working according to certain dimensions. And so, you know, I really liked that kind of interaction. I interacted along those lines and with legislators, policymakers in Brazil several times. I would probably try to do something like that. I don't know if with a think tank or an institute. I don't know.
True. Regrets? Have you got any regrets?
Regrets? Yeah, I mean, on a personal level, I think that is it's for everybody, right? I mean, we just work a lot at some point, and sometimes at some occasions our families are not the priority. But right now, my family is my priority above all else. So anyway, I would say in the last 5 or 6 years, I kind of you know, it totally changed my perspective before that. So I used it to accept many positions, you know, and would work during the weekends, etc. I will do that differently and try to optimize my time. I mean, I think I would be able to, you know, have some impact and at least spend, you know, anyway.
What are you most passionate about?
Yeah, I actually like to participate in discussions and have public discussions and have you know, this feeling that I'm helping somehow, you know, in terms of understanding of so that's what I love. I mean, and so I love to, you know, I love to do research, but also along the lines of you know, trying to increase our understanding of certain topics and also make that understandable. That's why I love to write books. I really love to write books. One book that I published in Brazil in 2010 that you mentioned was published in Portuguese. It's probably by far my most read kind of a piece of you know, work. And it's read by journalists, it's read by, you know, lawyers, you name it. So it's really, and they come to me and say, "Oh, thanks for illuminating." So I really love that kind of interaction. Of course, I try to do that always backed by research, by rigorous research, right? So I try to, when I do that, it's when I feel comfortable that I have something to say that is backed by years or even in some cases decades of research. So anyway, but I love that. I love it.
How do you explain your research to people who don't read your work regularly, to laymen on the streets? Why is your research important?
My research, sorry?
How do you explain the importance of your research?
So no, that's a very good question. And I always try to do that. And I always talk about my research to my wife and my daughter, and I like to see their reactions as well, and to other people. But perhaps it will help with a concrete example. My recent book, I'll publish publishing a new book. It will, be published in the beginning of next year, right? January or something, March. First quarter. And so the book essentially is about, I've done research on this kind of how private and public firms, help with certain activities that are of social or public interest, right? So I've done work on state-owned enterprises, whether they, not only are profitable, but they also have other social outcomes that are interesting. I've done work on public-private collaborations and partnerships, right? And also private firms involved in activities that I would say, are in the public interest or generate externalities, right? Mm-hmm. I was kind of, this book, I would say, let me talk about then how private firms, produce or involved in performance dimensions that have a social component, et cetera, if perhaps they can even, participate in critical services, critical activities such as education, prisons, whatever. So when I talk to people along those lines, they didn't understand what I was. But then some people would say to me, "So, are you by any means studying privatization, or how that kind of thing? How private firms may take over those activities that are normally considered part of the government?" And then I say, "Yes, that I understand." So anyway, I changed it. So the title of my book now is it was originally like, I don't know, public and private interdependencies or something. And then I said, the title of the book is now The Right Privatization. Why private firms and public initiatives need good governments. And this title immediately clicks. But essentially the book is about a comparative analysis, saying whether in which conditions we need a state-owned firm, or perhaps a private firm will be more efficient, or in between some sort of public-private collaboration. This is what the book is about. But when I mention privatization, then they say, "Oh, I understand." So yeah. So anyway, that was a long answer, but I think that it's important for us to see how or use words or use concepts that people are normally, or they're normally receive every day, right? Because sometimes we tend to use too much jargon.
There was an interview at Columbia, and it was a course interview, and he summarized everything, pretty much everything in the universe in like 2 minutes. It was the most clear thing I've ever heard in my life. It is so precise, so clear. Yeah. No jargon, it is so simple and so pure. And when a person summarizes something in 2 minutes in such clarity, and when it is so clear to you, it's just golden. Okay, about things that we should have covered more of, more thought about, things that are neglected in research, thinking about the international firm, the multinational firm. What do you think we should be thinking more of going forward?
Well, I mean, anyway, I have participated in discussions about future of research certain areas. I'm kind of reluctant to mention what I think because anyway, the field that Jay Barney says that, right? I mean, the field is what you know, I mean, say PhD students now will pursue in the future. But I think there are some. I think there are opportunities to move forward, especially in terms of those things that we see now. Now we are. I mean, we had this general understanding that globalization would be, you know, a no-brainer, it's good, etc., etc. But there are several, you know, forces against privatization now, globalization, which essentially derive from domestic versus international preferences. And domestic, you know, whether international firms will consider domestic demands, or how domestic firms will benefit from global presence, et cetera. I mean, we have seen this conflict many times occurring. I think that we didn't deal with those conflicts explicitly. So essentially, they mounted, or they became bigger and in a way. But it's I think there's a moment for us to you know, to think more about that in a more neutral way, right? Because of course there are those who strongly defend globalization. Oh yeah, no, global integration. There are those that are strongly opposed. Of course, everything in life has pros and cons. We need to understand those pros and cons and come up with new solutions. So, for instance, right? I mean, if you open an economy for international firms, certain domestic firms will be negatively affected. So, what can you do about it? I mean, can you compensate those firms? Can you train them to develop new capabilities in new areas? Can you help them become integrated in the value chain of those companies, those foreign companies that are becoming, you know, more present? You know, I think that there's a policy discussion. Economists are discussing those things now. Training, for instance, is very difficult. People tend to be attached to their previous jobs. I mean, if a person knows how to operate, you know, a production line in an automaker, that person will prefer to do that, even though there's a strong demand, say, in nursing homes or, you know, hospitals, et cetera, right? COVID actually created this dilemma because when there's this big outbreak, you need to react quickly in terms of production of masks, spots in hospitals, et cetera. Sometimes the local economy is not responsive enough, and multinational companies will also not be interested in perhaps, you know, investing a lot in their target countries along those lines. So a big question is whether then we need to have a minimal production capacity in each country that is obviously integrated in global chains. I mean, I see this dilemma as something that still needs to be studied and addressed.
About creativity or creativity in research, how does your mind work? How do you work? How do you come up with ideas for papers and topics for books?
Yeah, you are a specialist in creativity. You should answer this, but but you have done some work on that, right? What I do essentially is I like to see what is happening in the world, right? And be alert. Actually, let me tell a story about this. How I eventually started this study on state-owned enterprises. This will give you a concrete example on this. I was, as I mentioned before, when I graduated, I was focused on global. alliances, interorganizational networks, etc. But then 2 years after I graduated, that was 2003 or 4, something 2004, I guess, I got an invitation from Bruce Kogut. Bruce was at Insead by the time. Now he's in Colombia. And Bruce was creating a group of international scholars to examine who are the owners of the main corporations, right? I thought back then, Brazil and many other countries, they were they had this wave of privatizations, and then I thought, well, I mean, yeah, we're going to have here, if I collect this data, it's going to be pretty obvious because I'm going to see, you know, local groups and multinationals. When I collected the data and analyzed the data, I noticed the strong presence of the government in several of those companies, but in a different fashion. The government was not a controlling entity, but it was a minority investor, like via, you know, development banks, public banks, or pension funds, etc. It was really, I mean, what is this about? And then I started studying. So anyway, I think that at that moment I invested in that. So as a way, it was a bet, right? And then I said, I mean, I think this is not studied. So perhaps if this is a phenomenon that is important, back then also China was growing a lot with all those state-owned enterprises, and then I thought perhaps this could be a way forward. So this was kind of random, right? This was kind of purely random, but what I think I did was to be alert to those things, and then and to those opportunities, I say, and invest, right? And it's a bet, like any research and development activity, it's a bet. You are going to, you know, I had several other failed bets in my life, but this one, thankfully, it worked out.
It worked out great.
Yeah.
About advice, what are some of the common mistakes that you see junior faculty, PhD students make, and what's your advice to them for to do and to not to do things? Yeah.
Well, I you know, I don't know what I think. What I see in most of the cases is that, I mean, there's this, depending on where you are, you have this pressure towards tenure, etc. And sometimes it becomes a game of you know, writing papers that you know that this particular community will be interested in. Okay, and sometimes I myself erred because I didn't realize that you know, publications sometimes are about talking to a community, talking to a group of people, a specialized group of people, right? Sometimes they will not understand. Sometimes they will not be prepared to what you're proposing. So anyway, so that understanding is crucial. However, and then it's a paradox, because if you do that so too much, your life is going to become, you know, finding opportunities to publish or finding your way to those top journals, and perhaps you're going to lose track of certain types of critical issues, right, or critical demands that are important, right? Sometimes you have this disconnect. What you need in this case is, you know, the help of more senior scholars who also welcome that kind of a new idea, a new phenomenon, right? There's another, continuing my story. Let me just to exemplify. I told you that in the beginning of my career, then I decided to make this transition to study those kind of emerging market-ish things, right? Like you know, state-owned firms, institutional issues, etc. But then talking back then in 2005 or something, talk to my colleagues or folks in strategy, there was not very much, you know, in the agenda of the day. So it was more common to see, you know, papers on the biotech, the alliances between biotech firms in the US or something along those lines, right? And I was a bit depressed back then because I was said, I mean, what I do here and what is important for an emerging market perhaps is not interesting for an audience in the developed world. Anyway, so it was important at the moment when I was invited to be an international representative of the strategy division, and then I met or had an opportunity to discuss this issue with Anita McGann. And Anita was kind of, Anita, I'm a bit depressed because I think that the issues that I'm interested in they're important to Brazil are not pretty much discussed outside in regular conferences, etc. And then she said, no, it's quite the opposite. There's a group of scholars, and it is growing. They're becoming more and more interested in those things that in the interface of the public policies, etc., etc., etc. And she encouraged me to continue, and she was herself investing in those along those lines. I mean, research, ideas, new research ideas along those lines. So I think it is also important to have the support of those top scholars who are, let's say gatekeepers or something that will welcome those new ideas, so that more junior faculty can also, take more riskier bets, let's say, based on those new things that they may be interested in. Right?
Actually, the new areas that you just mentioned, Mahoney, Joe Mahoney,
Joe Mahoney is another big contributor in that.
It was something to pursue, definitely something to pursue. For the sake of time, what's the question that I should have asked you but haven't?
Yeah, a question that you could ask me. Anyway, you could ask me if I am an optimist or not. With all those things that are happening in the world, I mean, is there a path towards more prosperity, right? I mean, and we'll be happy in the future, let's say, right?
Okay, are we going to be happy in the future?
Oftentimes all those things are happening. And recently, so we had COVID and all those things. I also tend to be depressed in a sense, but at the end of the day, I think I'm a bit Star Trek guy along those lines, that perhaps we're going to move forward and find our own solutions. There's going to be conflict, right, along the way, but what I see is that. Right now, especially the new generation is demanding more things, different things, right? My daughter is 21, and her and her friends, I mean, they talk about other issues. They talk about diversity, inclusion, all those things. There are things that are not necessarily part of the discussion when I was, for instance, at her age. So I think that there's this new generation. There are issues that we can solve, potentially solve. So anyway, I'm moderately optimistic on what we can do, and I'm excited that in academia we have groups of people tuned to those issues and helping perhaps advance our understanding of those issues along the way.
That was interesting, actually. Sergio, with Star Trek, they had the prime directive, right?
Yeah.
So what's the prime directive for us going forward? Because their source of success was the prime directive. What is it?
Prime directive, such as, there's a group of, there are aliens, and then you should not touch them until they have developed, capabilities, right? Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Well, let me connect with this issue of privatization and liberalization. I think that much of the recommendations along those lines were like violations of the prime directives because they ignored the local institutions of the country, right? So depending on the country you go, I mean, you may propose a liberalization or privatization, but eventually this will clash with certain, rules or norms or interests, etc., right?
Yeah.
So I think that along the way we should be more plural, and I'm using this term plural, connecting with a philosopher called Isaiah Berlin, which essentially says that societies in general, they can follow several paths. Those paths may be different, but you should respect those paths along the way. So some societies may, for instance, pursue more state interventions. Other societies will be more market-based. Other societies will be a hybrid. I mean, I don't think it is our, our rights essentially as academics to say or what they should do or what the best way to pursue. I think what we can show is that there are ways, there are risks, there are pros, there are cons, and help illuminate those discussions, right? So I think that the prime directive, one of the prime directives of StratTrack would be more or less reflected, I guess, in this notion of plural, being plural, right? Admitting variations, right?
Perfect.
And not without prejudice or without preconceptions.
Sergio, thank you so much for this interesting and very candid interview. I enjoyed it. I'm sure the audience will agree with me. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was an honor when I received your invitation, and your questions were really, really interesting and fun.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.